Welcome back to another episode of Constellation Conversations with Heloise.
Hello. So today we're here to talk about Capricorn season because Capricorn season is between December 22nd and January 20th, and we are in that time right now. So David, you are actually a Capricorn, correct?
I guess I am. I really don't know that much about it.
So you are a Capricorn sun, and maybe even more. We'll get into that later. But so Capricorns are a kind of cardinal earth sign. So remember, you have cardinal, mutable, and fixed, and you have earth, wind, fire, and water, of course, the four elements. So being a cardinal sign kind of means you're like, I'm going to get what I want. Like, you're an ambitious person. You can be a little bit domineering. You can be a leader. Like, they're very quick people. And this is combined with being an earth sign, which are known as very, like, practical, determined, calculating people. Like, Capricorns are basically known as the, like, workaholics, stone cold workaholics.
Well, that is slightly accurate. A couple different parts.
So actually I have a few things. How much of a Capricorn are you? If you want to tell me, yes or no, do you relate to these things?
Okay.
Would you consider yourself a perfectionist?
No, actually. I like to do very good, but I know what the standards are, and I just meet those. Don't need to go all the way.
Interesting. Would you consider yourself a leader type?
I can be if I need to be, but I'm perfectly content to work with others and not be the leader necessarily.
Are you frustrated when people are very indecisive?
Yes, that is a big frustration for me. Like, you need to make a decision, make it, and move on. If you spend too much time thinking about it like that, it's just worse.
This is very typical. Would you consider you have a kind of dry sense of humor?
I do think that would describe me rather well.
Do you think that you're good at planning and, like, calculating?
Planning when I choose to be, and calculating I would say yes.
Would you say you are an adventurous or a non-adventurous person?
It depends. I like to try some new things, but I do like the comfort of the known.
Do you enjoy stability?
Stability is quite nice.
Okay. So I think it's kind of interesting. Some of the things, and I also know you as, like, a person. So some of the things are traditionally Capricorn. Capricorns do tend to be perfectionists. So it's interesting that you would consider yourself kind of, meeting the benchmark and then being satisfied.
I think of it more as a practical thing. If 100% gets me the same result as 90%, why do 100%?
Okay, well, that reasoning actually is very fitting for being a Capricorn. You're still calculating. All right, so let's look. I actually have your birth chart right here. And of course, your sun is in Capricorn. This is no surprise because you are born between the two dates. So the sun, once again, is kind of like the core of who you are. It's a sign that people give a lot of importance to, and it's really like your ego and the sign that people are most likely to identify you with. So being a sun in Capricorn just means you are very responsible and serious and efficient and also kind of ambitious in a way. You can have a tendency for being like a workaholic and for wanting to drive yourself to success, or even like supporting the dreams of those around you, like your friends or someone that you're close to, like your family. You want to see them do well. And a sun in Capricorn, also the stereotype is you're pretty emotionally reserved. You're not crying in public or anything like that. How would you say that describes you?
Honestly, I'm seeing most of my personality there. That is hitting a lot of the major marks, which is kind of interesting. And in general, actually, I haven't really looked at my birth chart at all with astrology, which is, I'm sure, quite a surprise. So it's kind of interesting to see it planned out a little bit here.
So let's look what's next. I see you have a moon in Leo. Moon sign, again, is your inner person. Who is David when he is alone in his room? Like, what is the true David? So it's emotions, it's moods, it's feelings. And your moon being in Leo is a very proud and expressive sign. It's a fire sign, which once again is those kind of like open people, like TED Talk in a way. They're kind of idealistic and a little bit self-centered sometimes. As you can tell, like thinking of lions, it's kind of like they're the king of the world. And they tend to require validation from other people. How would you say that describes the true David?
Well, I mean, going off of what I'm thinking here, a validation thing, that's not really me. Honestly, don't care too much what other people think. I'm happy with myself and what I'm doing. I don't really need external support for that. And for idealism, that one's a bit of a miss for me. I would definitely not describe myself as an idealist. I lean more towards a realist. So, I mean, that could just be, like you said, I think it was the earth side, the practical side. That is definitely more of what I feel in general.
Okay. Well, that, some people really do identify more with like the main three, ascendant, moon, and sun. Some people are really sun-centric and don't feel the other two as much. So let's see. You have a second sign in Capricorn, which is your Mercury sign, which is again kind of the communication sign, like how you think through things and how you learn too. So, taking again those traditional traits of a Capricorn, the way you communicate with others is probably going to be very practical and very efficient and rational and serious. And when you think through things, it's kind of in a grounded way. You're not going to be the one to be, impulse buying things on Amazon or anything like that. And they also tend to be very curious people, especially about kind of the scientific things. And this kind of negative side of a Capricorn and Mercury is tending to be kind of a poor communicator when it comes to emotions.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing quite a bit of my general attitudes there. About the emotional expression, I mean, I would probably say I'm not the best at times, but I don't know if I'm necessarily the worst. But overall, this is actually interestingly pretty accurate so far.
Well, actually, I always say that you're like the ultimate Capricorn because you've got another planet in Capricorn. This is your Venus. Venus, again, is about affection, attraction, and like bonds to family in a way too. So your Venus is in Capricorn, which means that, again, when it comes to caring to people, you're kind of repressed just in the sake of like responsibility and rationalness. Like, you can care about people, but you're very cautious because you like appreciate that stability. So you're not the type to, like buy a last minute plane ticket to New York just to see that one person again. Do you agree?
I would agree with that statement. I'm not going to be in a cheesy romantic movie anytime soon.
Wow. Well, so let's move on and see what's next. I see what's interesting here is your next sign, your Mars sign, is in Pisces. Pisces is a water sign, which are known for being kind of in tune with oneself, also pretty emotional and reflective. Pisces specifically, kind of the stereotype is that they're very dreamy and like their dreams come true. They're the spiritual of the signs. So Mars is about aggression, which you'd think, how would those combine? Well, your Mars in Pisces basically means that you assert yourself in a very intuitive and thoughtful way. and you push things forward kind of based on your imagination and on what you feel is the right way going forward, if that makes sense. It does also mean that you can be very dreamy in the way you would have like a vision of something and you'd really want to push that forward no matter what. Does that kind of resonate with you?
So I think out of these, this is probably so far the least accurate. I wouldn't necessarily say it's entirely wrong, but I'm not really seeing any obvious connections to how I generally am. So I'm a little bit unsure about that one there.
I mean, that is possible. Some of these, when I'm looking at your chart, you have a planet in Cancer, which once again is a water sign, more in tune with the emotions. You have Sagittarius, Leo, Capricorn, and Aquarius. So this is a very interesting combination. You've got two fire signs, an air sign, two water signs, and then your Capricorn, your earth sign, has 3 planets in one, which is a lot. Like, most people have a more balanced mix. But actually, let's move on to your Aquarius, which would be an air planet, and that's your ascendant, which is kind of how you present yourself to others. So this is kind of like when people first meet you, who do they think you are? How do you kind of, vibe with them, to put it in very, conversational language? So your ascendant is in Aquarius. Aquarius are very broad-minded, intellectual, kind of distant people, very abstract, and also sometimes kind of detached in the way that they would deal with those close to them. It's also, when people first meet you, you might be kind of like eccentric just in some of like your interests or in what you're really passionate about. So that's kind of, and of course, again, you see that kind of emotional reservedness. How do you feel about that?
I would say that's pretty close. It's not obviously like the original first, like, yeah, that's totally me, but this, yeah, I can see some notes there of how I generally feel, and yeah.
So those are your main planets. You can also move on to your Jupiter and Saturn, which are kind of social planets. You could talk about Uranus and Neptune, which are planets that go more about your generation as a whole. Like, Uranus is for the 7 years in which you are born. Like, it's a time span of 7 years, and your birth year falls within that. And for Neptune, it's 14 years. Both of those are in the same planet, Aquarius. And so that's kind of a more broader introspect into both how you are, but maybe also, how I am, because we're in the same 7 years of being born, and how most people in this high school are. So it's kind of, it's a lesser defining planet, 2 planets. So this would be your birth chart. I don't know. How do you feel about it as a whole?
I mean, to be honest, I have very low expectations for the accuracy of, any of this. So
Very
it is
Capricorn thing to say.
Yes, I mean, it's because there's no real evidence that any of this is really based on anything. But I would say that it is, for the most part, pretty accurate. It's not 100% this is me, but I see myself in like 80% of these things for sure. And then, so I think maybe as a general, so what would you say, what should people do if once they've looked at their chart, read through it all, what would you recommend them do with that information?
So I think that charts, for a lot of people, it's a sense of like self-validation and like groundedness. If you're trying to find out who am I think sometimes people take charts the wrong way and are like, all of this has to apply to me. But I personally believe that like people have different planets that influence them more. Your moon and your sun and your Venus and your Mercury, all those planets are going to pull on you, but with different strengths, I would say. I think if there's any room for like self-improvement, sometimes there are in these charts. Like with Capricorn, the stereotype is like, hey, you can be kind of emotionally detached and you can be a little bit too rational. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but just, that's something to think about in the future. I wouldn't necessarily now go to every monthly horoscope and see what your life is going to be like. I think you should live your life as you want to, but it is kind of a fun tool to see how much of this applies to me and how in any way could I better myself.
Okay, and so maybe on the opposite side, if I was somebody whose chart really didn't match with my personality at all, what would you say about that?
I think there could be one of two options. First, I tend to kind of gloss over in these chart readings the minor planets. Pluto is a planet that we consider, even though that's been some debate. Neptune is a planet we consider. I think that if you really think that you don't see yourself in like the big six, look at the smaller planets. There's also a thing called houses, which kind of indicates how much each sign influences you. If a sign is in your 11th house, it's going to influence you, or your 12th house the least. And if it's in your first house, it's going to influence you the most. So do look at that. If your sun, which is actually kind of funny, for you, your sun is in your 11th house. So even though you consider yourself to be a very traditional Capricorn, maybe it only applies to certain aspects. I will say, like, I said it was like on a scale of 1 to 12, how much would it apply? It's not quite like that. It's just which aspects does it apply for you? Like your 6th house, I remember, is about like work and routines and like health. So say for you, like your moon in Leo is in your 6th house. Maybe your Leo characteristics only apply to the way you work, what you value in routines, and what kind of like value or importance you place on like health. So it kind of works like that. I would say, like, if you think your chart is totally off, look into it. Like, look into those little things. Astrology can be very complicated.
Yeah, I can definitely see it's a bit complicated. Now, I am a little curious about the more generational planets. Could you maybe tell me a little bit about those, the 7-year and 14 one?
Sure. So both of those, as I told you, were in Aquarius. Aquarius kind of indicates that as a generation, you're trying to detach yourself from what came before you. You're trying to do something different. And other generations might kind of look onto that with shock and with horror, but you're trying to kind of go as far as your imagination will reach you. Aquarius, kind of linked with Pisces, they're very introspective signs, forward-looking, independent, trying to also be kind of curious and free-spirited. So those are kind of general themes. I think especially with like the technology that our generation has, you do kind of see a very big generational gap. And I'm not saying that like the stars predicted Apple, but it is kind of interesting the way we're taking things like technology and fashion and defining ourselves as something very different from what came before.
Yeah, I do think it's quite interesting. I feel in general, given those kind of time spans, that's pretty accurate. Though I will say for me, that's probably not very accurate at all.
Yeah.
I definitely lean more towards the traditional side of things. I'm not the biggest fan of some of the newer movements, you could say. So I guess in that sense, I'm a bit of an outlier from my generations.
Well, of course, you're going to have those in every generation. And that's why I said these are kind of broad things. It's very hard to have every person within 14 years be defined by one underlying trait. This would be kind of a majority movement.
Okay, so I think that's all the time we have today.
All right.
Thanks for talking with me and illuminating my birth chart a little bit.
Thank you very much for having me. Happy Capricorn season.
Yeah.